Let's get to our panel right now. Joining us with more from Beijing, Zhao Hai is a research fellow with the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Down the street from our studio, right here in Washington, D.C., Derek Scissors is a research scholar with the American Enterprise Institute. From Buenos Aires, Martin Redrado is a senior economic advisor with the World Bank and former president of Argentina's central bank. And with us in the studio, Tran is the executive managing director for the Institute of International Finance. Thank you to all of you for joining us. Zhao Hai, let me start with you. So this is an important summit that's going to be taking place in Buenos Aires. On the official agenda, the big things are focused on development, infrastructure, and food security. But no doubt this summit, this meeting, is going to be overshadowed by the trade dispute between the United States and China. How big an issue will this current trade dispute be at the G20?
I think the issue between U.S. and China, particularly on trade, is the #1 issue, a top priority for Chinese leader going into the G20 meeting in Buenos Aires. And I think, but however, I think on the Chinese side, the expectation has been lowering, and people are trying to prepare themselves for the worst scenario, for the worst outcome. I think at this point, it's very clear that some of the people in the Trump administration is not willing to reach a deal with China, and they're not ready. However, on the other hand, you have some people in the Trump administration wanted to reach a deal, and China has been ready, trying to reach out and reach a deal with the U.S. side. I think it's very hard at this point to reach a substantive deal with the U.S. because the time limit, because the efforts put in, because the correspondence between the two sides. However, we're expecting probably some kind of procedural deal between the two sides, setting up a framework going forward and to define the process of how to negotiate between the two sides. Hopefully, the tariff war will be halted at this moment, and moving forward, two sides can sit down and start the real negotiations.
Derek Scissors, what do you make of that, I guess, very discouraging scenario that was presented there? On the one side, as Zhao Hai told us, there is unwillingness on the part of the United States to come to some kind of deal. On the other side, we have the Chinese who are quite happy and prepared to make a deal.
I mostly agree with that. I would say there's a lot of disagreement with the administration. The U.S. is a big country with a lot of opinions, so is China. The person in charge is the president. And we've seen President Trump change his language from "I'm going to impose tariffs in September," which he did not do, to "China really wants to make a deal. I want to have a meeting with my friend." He calls him his friend a lot, Xi Jinping. So I think in the short term, President Trump does want to have a deal. Whether it's extensive or baseline, however you want to term it, I think that's secondary.
Right.
I think the 2019, which is not a U.S. political election year, is the easier year. I think 2020 is the challenge for U.S.-China relations.
Derek, I want you to take a listen to what the Chinese Vice Commerce Minister Wang Shouwen had to say recently. Just watch this.
Under the circumstances when global trade and investments are in great difficulties, G20 has the responsibility to discuss trade and investment protectionism and need to send out clear signal against unilateralism and trade protectionism.
So Derek, listening to that, what's your best case scenario for what comes out of this summit?
A ceasefire that lasts through 2019, a rest period for global markets who have been hurt by uncertainty in the U.S. and China, a suspension of the U.S. tariff increase, even though the president said he'd be willing to go forward with it, a lifting of the Chinese, essential embargo on some U.S. commodities, just some breathing space. It's not a long-term solution. That is going to be very difficult. I don't think that occurs till 2021, if then. But I do think the best case scenario is we get a year where everyone can be a little less tense.
Right, let's go to Buenos Aires, to Martin Redrado. And Martin, Argentina, no doubt, wants to show off its new market-friendly economy to the world at this G20 summit. This is a big opportunity for Argentina and its people. What impact is this going to have on the country?
It is more symbolic, the impact that it will have on Argentina's population. It is going to show a clear willingness of this country to be a responsible member of the international community and to broker modestly, if we can, to get a deal among the whole nations. I expect that they can focus because they've tried to be all things to all people, so it's better if they can focus in terms of how do we get on with the world economy and how do we tackle the main problems that we have in front. If they achieve a consensus of that, that could be an important step in the G20.
Tran, we see very different approaches to the world economy from the world's biggest economic powers, China and the United States. China preaches the gospel of globalization, of free markets, open markets, while the United States has been talking about imposing tariffs, about putting up protectionist barriers, about America first. We've heard that before. So what role can the G20 play in, I guess, bringing these fundamental differences or getting rid of these fundamental differences?
I think essentially it is rather whether or not the U.S. and China can resolve their differences, which will drive the final communique of the G20 summit, than the other way around. If you look at the APEC summit just a week or 10 days ago, they failed to have a statement on world trade included in the final communique, resulting from the disagreement between U.S. and China. So I would expect the same process to be happening in Buenos Aires. If the U.S. and China can come to terms, then the summit will be successful. If not, the section on trade will be empty, similar to the APEC summit that we saw a week ago.
Zhao Hai, what are the risks of there being no communique coming out of the G20? I mean, could we see the same thing happen that we saw at APEC, where there were such deep differences between the United States and China that there was no joint communique? I think that was the first time that happened in 3 decades of APEC meetings.
Yes, we definitely hope there will be a different result from the G20. I wanted to see that actually G20 is created to establish a global common front against the threat of financial crisis. And that G20 is a platform for cooperation. And today, other than U.S.-China trade disputes, we're commonly facing a lot of challenges from climate change to e-business growing in the world. So I think we have to face these common challenges and reach a common understanding of how to respond to the current global threat. And stop trade war against each other. Just recently, U.S. published a new report on climate change, and the threat is really real and now. And also, if you look at the recent numbers during the holiday season, for example, in China, Double 11, you have 200 billion Chinese renminbi trading over, just in one day. And in the U.S., you have Cyber Monday trading over $60 billion in one day. So I think there are a lot of new developments from technological perspective, financial perspective, and there are a lot of threats. So in order to deal with all these threats and find all opportunities for a common future, we need to work together instead of just focusing narrowly on this trade dispute.
In fact, if I can intervene, besides the trade tension between U.S. and China, climate change could be another area of disagreement, not agreement at the G20, whether or not the G20 can reaffirm commitment and support to the COP21 Paris goals of reducing temperature below 2 degrees Celsius is in dispute. So I think that there are those 2 key areas of potential disagreement that we have to watch out for. The other areas could be agreement, particularly infrastructure for development, which I think everyone would agree. The area of future of work in terms of how to educate the workers, training and education to prepare them for the new coming of new technology. But I think overshadow those potential agreement and great agreement that can be had, we have these 2 issues, trade and climate change, that can be difficult to overcome.
All right. Derek, I was going to bring up the issue of climate change later, but let's talk about it right now since it's been brought up. That report that our panelists have been talking about was a federally mandated report, which was released on Friday. And one of the things it says is that if nothing is done about climate change, it could cost the United States economy hundreds of billions of dollars in the future. How important, how big are the stakes for that particular issue at this G20 summit?
Well, I'm not really familiar with all G20 participants' views of climate change. I think we can cut through the American view pretty easily, which is when the president was asked about the report, he said, "I don't believe it." So you're not going to get the president treating this. The report issued by the U.S. government that he's the president of, he doesn't believe. You're not going to get U.S. cooperation on sweeping climate change action. Maybe there'll be a communique, maybe there won't. I don't really care about G20 communiques. I care about whether there's action taken on them. The U.S. will not go along with that action, as indicated by the president's response to his own government's report.